when it was just a question of the diplomatic cables going into the foreign relations volumes, it was possible to have a more sort of comprehensive selection of diplomatic cables on a specific subject. It was also true at that time, as John was talking about the volume of material that's generated. It was also true that in the older times, the period up to, say, the end of the Eisenhower administration, the amount of paper being generated was smaller. So that also facilitated a more comprehensive selection of the materials. On the other hand, it's of vital importance to scholars to have access to White House materials and Department of Defense materials and Central Intelligence Agency materials, in addition to simply the State Department materials, as well as, in particular, the memoranda of conversation of presidents with senior officials in the United States government, which were completely excluded under the older set of the FRUS. So the real trade-off, I think, was between comprehensiveness in the diplomatic record versus range of access across government material. And if you look at the more recent set where the range of access has improved, there again you have differences, because for a short space of time, say from about 61 through 65 or 66, the department's historians made an effort to expand the coverage by means of supplementary materials. So they issued these microfiche sets that had an additional range of documents besides what was in the published collected set, which we've sort of given up on now, except that we have these electronic-only volumes that are kind of like that, but a little bit different as well, because we're choosing to use them to profile subject matters that might not be dealt with otherwise in the printed volumes. So it's a matter of taste to some degree, whether you prefer using this series or the more recent series. And I think that scholars, as Mish was talking about, have their quite decided preferences on what they think is the best one. But I also agree with Mitch that scholars believe that they need everything. And so we're never going to be satisfied unless we have the entire record.
Yeah, and let me follow up on that also. I very much agree with what John said, and I want to make sure we don't leave too rosy a picture of where we are based on some of the earlier comments. I tried to be quite clear that I am cautiously optimistic about the future and where we're going. Nevertheless, let's not fool ourselves into thinking that everything is fixed and that now there's a new office and a few new programs and it's all going to be wonderful. In preparation for this panel, I went back and I read the National Declassification Center report, which came out just a year or two ago, as well as the State Department's Inspector General's report that came out roughly a year ago. And they paint gloomy pictures, both of them. The NDC report points out that there are over 400 million pages at NARA that are on backlog for declassification. In order to get these out in a hurry, they're talking about various sampling procedures and random, not random, but looking at the number of requests in various fields and then getting things into the process that way. When you consider the number of agencies that the Bush administration gave the power to classify materials to that had never been done before, like the Department of Agriculture or the EPA, I mean, these are unprecedented areas, and it's going to take a while to get through that. Consider that as well in the light of the Inspector General's report, which noted that there had been an earlier report that recommended 26 reforms to the historian's office to sort of improve morale and efficiency. And although it noted that most of them had been implemented, they had been implemented in some cases more slowly than others, and that in a number of ways things had not improved. And so when they advocated for a minimum of 12 volumes a year in order to catch up with the 30-year rule, while on paper it seems like that might be feasible, it clearly recognized the number of obstacles that stood in the way. So although I applaud the steps that President Obama has taken, and certainly it's a dramatic shift from the earlier administration, we still have quite a long way to go and quite a few problems to solve.
Professor Weinberg.
Yes, Garrett Weinberg, retired from Chapel Hill.
Since this is a session under the American Historical Association's auspices, I would be interested to hear the reaction to the recommendation that the AHA made on the classification issue 20 years ago. And that is that classifications should be valid only if the original classification included a declassification schedule. In other words, a document that is stamped top secret has to have on it in the stamp, secret, whatever the year, 10, 15, 20 down the road, confidential, unclassified, which means that the document would only have to be reviewed either if the declassification was to be put off further or brought closer on. Given the enormous quantities of records, it seemed to us in the AHA at the time that this was the only practical way, in fact, to engage the issue. I'm aware of the fact that nobody has adopted this particular approach in the intervening 20 years. But from what I have heard, in fact, it probably remains the only way to engage these hundreds of millions, literally billions of pages that no government agency will ever be able to employ enough people to review. It may be worthwhile, and I would be interested in the reactions of the panel, to look again what the AHA suggested in the past. That is, that an original classification embody downgrading dates which can be changed to postpone downgrading or speed it up, but only if the actual document is examined for that purpose, so that those which are not touched, those hundreds of millions which sit around and nobody gets to, will get automatically declassified in accordance with the time schedule that the original classifier thought appropriate at the time that he or she decided this must be classified.
Thank you for your question. I appreciate it. And in fact, this does happen, and this is happening now. And actually, it started in 1995 with President Clinton's order. And essentially, Section 1.5 of the order states that you cannot classify information longer than 25 years. Its classification is automatically declassified at age 25, automatically. In addition, the next section talks about markings. So not only is the information automatically declassified at a set date, no longer than 25 years into the future, the order requires that not only does that date have to be conspicuously marked on that document, the date it will be declassified, this new order actually goes a little bit further. It requires that the identity be listed. So the person who actually classified that document has to have their either name or their number written down, their personal identifier written down for intelligence community people. The idea is that when 25 years comes around, you'll know exactly where to go back to get that information declassified. Now, and the reason I'm bringing that up is a little bit is, right now agencies can make two choices when information gets to be 25 years old. They can choose to review it and to see if they have exemptable material that fit in one of those 9 categories, or they can choose not to review it and do nothing. It's automatically declassified. That's what happens now. I'm sure John is going to build off of this a little bit. But that's the idea, is that information is automatically declassified when it reaches 25 years. It is the documents, the records are actually marked with a specific event or a date that can't go out beyond 25 years. There are a few exceptions to that. The exceptions obviously be for, in this order, the new order is for key concepts of weapons of mass, design concepts of mass destruction, or the identity of a confidential human source. Those are the two exceptions. Otherwise, everything is 25 years or less.
Gerhard, let me add a little bit to that. It's also true that another difficulty has been in the past that people had this sort of infinite ability to just sit and classify things, and that one of the advantages in the new executive order that the administration has issued is that, in fact, original classifiers of material will be trained and certified in a certain way before they're let loose to go make classification decisions. So that's another point. But I should add to what Dr. Powers just said, that in fact, at the archive, in our projects where we bring in declassified documents, we are seeing now that the declassified documents have exactly what you're talking about. You know, classified by, release on X date, right? Depending on the level of the document, that's like the dates that are chosen. But the real solution here is none of the above. The real solution is to classify less information. And what that means is not only to have a more detailed knowledge of what really needs to be secret and what is a national security secret, but it also means to be able to roll back what is the level of the material so that rumors, for example, aren't classified secret. And it means that we need a more precise understanding of what is secret about some piece of information. The rules about releasing information focus on this idea that some information causes damage to national security. Well, what is damage to national security? If the original classifying authority is obliged to put on paper at the moment of the inception of a secrecy rating for a document, the reason why that is a potential for damage to national security, I maintain, I submit to you, that by itself would constrain the imposition of security classification on a range of material of huge proportions. So I think there are other things we can still do to reduce the dimension of this problem.
And I think John's last point is a great one, and it's will likely prove to be the ultimate legacy of WikiLeaks. For all the fuss about it and all all the media attention that it's captured, what I find most surprising about it is how unsurprising it all is, right? I mean, I just wrote an article about what the WikiLeaks materials show us about North Korea. And there's really nothing that historians haven't said over a long time period, that North Korea is perhaps not as close to China as we thought they were, that nobody really likes Kim Jong-il, and lots of other things, and that they use foreign policy crises to prop up the regime and more. And if you go beyond North Korea, we learn that Vladimir Putin is still a pretty authoritarian figure in Russia, and that organized crime plays a big role there. And we learn that many Arab leaders don't trust other Arab or Persian leaders. And we learn that Pakistan is a pretty complicated place politically, and maybe not the world's most reliable ally. I mean, this is shocking and breathtaking stuff that you can only get otherwise if you do something subversive like read a newspaper. So I think the biggest legacy of WikiLeaks may well prove to be that people recognize that the material that's being classified secret in many of these cases really is not the type of threat to national security that it's claimed to be.